Hello everyone. In this video, I will go over how to program a Sprog LCC ServoIO board for use with push buttons. We will assume you have JMRI set up to connect to your railroad. Once JMRI is connected to your railroad, you can open up Decoder Pro. From that point, we will open up the LCC menu and we will choose Configure Nodes. The node tree will open up and you can see the nodes that I have available to edit. Because I'm using a TCS 105 command station, everything is available on the LCC network, including throttles if they're turned on, and the TCS command station itself, and all the programming can be done inside of JMRI. So we're going to be working with node number 6. Node number 6 is going to control the turnouts in Bethesda. And so we'll click on that node and it'll open up the drop-down menu, and then we will choose Open Configuration Dialog. It takes a moment to read the entire node because it's a complicated node. There's a lot of settings in it. And once it's finished reading, you will have a window that looks like this. So inside the configuration window, you have several things that you can do. The identification page is not something you can edit. That is from the manufacturer. The segment description you can edit, and you can see here I've named it ServoIO Node 6, and the description is Bethesda. And from this point on, you can start your configuration. Now, if you haven't set up your servos yet, you would install your servos on the railroad, and then you need to go to Bank A and change Bank A to servos. When you first get your board, Bank A is an input-output device, but we need to change it to servos, and then we'll write that change to the board. Every time you make a change, you need to write the change, or you can make several changes and then say Save Changes down here at the bottom. So I've hit the refresh button. My board is already set up for servos. Once you have restarted the node after setting this to servos, you will end up with 8 tabs, and each of these tabs is a servo. So the channel setup for each servo is right here, and that's what we'll come back to in a moment. And this is where we will enter our consumers. But the first thing you would need to do is close this and go to servos on Bank A. When you first open up the page, if you have not set up your servos, you will be presented with a pair of sliders and some factory settings. The sliders will determine the direction and the length of the throw for each servo. Notice there's an off position and an on position. For my railroad, the on position indicates the turnout will go straight through. It will not diverge to the left or to the right. The off position will be my diverging route for that particular turnout. From the factory, it comes set up with the sliders in the middle, so the servo is centered. So you can set the servo arms and set up everything on the railroad while you're working in this page. The rest of these settings are factory settings, and the Sprog LCC page has videos explaining these different settings, so I'm not going to get into that right now. Once all of your servos have been mechanically set up and set up with the software here, you can close this and we're ready to program the input buttons for your control panel if that's what you're going to be using. And that this video is about using it as a control panel. I like to make a spreadsheet that has what I call a truth table. And you can quickly go through your track plan and decide for each button which turnouts need to be on and which turnouts need to be off. Again, for my railroad, off is the diverging route, on is straight through the turnout. And you'll notice in that spreadsheet that the turnouts are listed as T1, T2, T3, etc. And then the bank A consumers are listed as A1, A2, A3. T1 and A1 are the same thing. So I call them T1 for turnout 1. You can call them S1 for servo 1, or just label it as A1, however you like. My buttons will produce the events that the servos will consume. And on the left side of the spreadsheet, you can see my buttons listed 1 through 8. In this example, I'm only going to use 7 buttons, or 7 inputs. So I start at button 1. And button 1 on the track chart is the main number 1. So what do I need? I need turnout 1 to be on. So you can see A1 is on. Turnout 2 is on. That's A2. Turnout 4 is on. That's A4. And turnout 7 is off. And that is A7. Now, if you look at the bottom of the spreadsheet, the factory set producers for each of the inputs on bank B are on and off for each button or each input. So we'll use P1 or button 1 as an example. And that is 0.66 and 0.67. So 0.66 is on and 0.67 is off. When we're looking at the event numbers, if you're working with a single board, you can ignore the highlighted numbers I have on the screen. We're only working with the last 2 numbers. So if we go back to button 1 on the spreadsheet, you can see A1 needs to be on, A2 needs to be on, A4 needs to be on, and A7 needs to be off. So how do we program that? Well, you take those numbers and you come into the producers here. For bank B is set for input output, and we have button 1, which will be B1. And you don't need to do anything with the consumers right now. We're only going to be dealing with the producers. We have up to 6 producers. And for this control panel, the largest number of producers I will need will be 5 producers. So B1, channel B1 and you look at your spreadsheet, and we need 0.66, and it needs to be on. That's our first producer. And then you save that. Look at the spreadsheet. The next one we need would be A2, which would be 72. And again, the input is on. And we save that. Moving across from left to right on the spreadsheet at button 1, our next consumer would be on 8A. So we place that in producer number 3. We have 8A. We have input on. And our last input for button number 1 would be AF, and that would need to be off. And you can place that into producer number 4 slot. And you can see we have AF. The input is off. And that's it. You've now programmed your first button input. And the rest of the programming, you follow the same set of instructions. So we would go to button number 2 or B2, go down to the producers. In this case, we have 4 producers again. And you'll notice the numbers 7F, AE, with the on or off inputs correspond with the spreadsheet. Once everything is programmed for the producers, you save it. Whenever you save your work, you have to hit update complete in order to restart the node. And that is all we need to do to set the inputs. Now, to set the consumers for the actual servos, you go back to Bank A. Bank A, again, we set as servos earlier. You adjusted all your servos mechanically in the other setup window. And now we need to set up the consumers. So we're not going to have any producers in the servo area. We're only going to have consumers. So we go to consumer or channel setup A1. And again, you look at your spreadsheet and you look at the column for A1. And you can see we have 2 unique producers, 0.66 and 0.67. So I come down here to consumer number 1. I program in 0.66, and the action is on. And I save that. Then I go to consumer number 2, and I enter the 0.67 with an action of off. And I save that. Each of the servos will have only 2 inputs in this situation. So we go to A2, which is servo number 2. And we go down here to consumer. And once again, you look at your spreadsheet, and we only have 2 unique numbers, a 72 and a 73. So I put in 72, and 72 equals on action. And in consumer number 2, I put in 73, and that is an off action. And that's all you have to do. You do that for the next 7, or all 7 servos in this situation, for this example. Once you're done, you hit update complete, and your ServoIO will be fully configured and ready to go. Once you're finished programming the I/O board, a simple push of a button will line up all the turnouts for that particular siding. I hope that helps. I know it took me a little while to figure this out. Andrew on the Sprog IO groups page helped me out, but this is very simple to do, and I want to thank him for helping me with that. If anybody has any questions, you can put them in the comments, and I hope this helps.